Good morning, guys. So again, last couple of weeks has been pretty exciting, and we have been talking about some generic topics, but with some disruptive comments on top of it. I mean, that's where probably the whole beauty of this conversations are coming up. So we have been talking about technology, but not technology in general, which probably people are talking about day in day out. We were talking about things which are very general. We see those things, we discuss about those technologies, but then again the views around those technologies has been completely disruptive throughout all those conversations. Today, again, it's going to be very interesting because this is something that in this region, in this market, we don't hear it pretty often. I mean, back in India, this is something that probably every other organization would like to hear, but in this market, it's been very rare. We actually hear about this topic. We don't even converse about it, and as IT guys, we are not even comfortable going and talking about this concept. Probably, I don't know why this taboo is all about. So we are going to talk about open source today, and I'm talking to one of the gentlemen who has been advocating open source for more than 2 decades now, if I'm not wrong. And we are really pleased to welcome Mr. Mukul Mahajan, who is the director for Tetra Information Services in India. And this is one company I have known. I was personally associated with this company, and this is one company which I have known who has never diverted its path from open source throughout their journey, throughout their inception. They have just spoken about one language and they stuck to their word that they will not talk anything beyond open source. Pretty exciting, pretty disruptive. I mean, we talk about disruptions right now, but probably they have been talking about disruptions for more than 2 decades right now. So it's going to be an exciting conversation with you. Welcome, Mukul. Welcome to the conversation.
Thank you,
And
Arita.
we hope to, I know you for probably more than a decade right now. You have been my
Yes.
mentor at one point of time, and it's really good to have you after so many years. And we really look forward to have some disruptive conversation today. So starting out with a very, very straightforward question: why this taboo around open source? I mean, why people don't talk about open source? So people talk about open source, but at the end of the day, when it comes to the real practical implementation of something on open source, they probably take a back step. There's a
See,
taboo. I don't
now,
know.
yes. So if you look at it, this whole journey of open source, it started more than 20 years ago. When people had started foraying into open source, there were few projects which were there, something like Red Hat at that time was a pure open source player. And
Correct.
then over a period of time, there have been two divisions in open source. One is free and open source, which you can download directly and start using it, and second is commercial open source, something like what Red Hat gives or Oracle gives, or so many companies have forayed into it. Now,
Correct.
if you look at it, almost everybody uses open source. Everybody who's using web is using open source, whether it is
Absolutely.
Google or whether it is any big e-commerce chain or anything. Everybody is using open source. Only thing is, companies who have strong technical background, normally who are able to do R&D, who have their own team, they are using free open source and making products on them, which might be commercial open source. And companies who are corporates or enterprises, they are either buying products like Microsoft or which are not open source, or they would like to go in for a supported open source. It's more of a compliance issue. If you look at finance, they
Hmm.
need some OEM to be backed by them. If you look at government, they need some OEM to be backed by them. If you look at
Correct.
defense, they also need some OEM to be backed by them. So they are looking at commercial or supported open source like Red Hat. And then companies who can afford, companies like Hero Motocorp and all, who are large companies, they will always like to have some OEM at the back of them. But there
Hmm.
is still a lot of companies who are using free and open source, but there is nobody to advocate that. So you have a lot of
Correct.
companies who are downloading vTiger and using it. There are a lot of companies who are downloading free Zimmer and using it. Lot of company like us who are supporting them, but those numbers are not there. If you see at numbers will only come where there is some organization at the back. So if you
Hmm.
see any analyst or anything, he will only need to know either products which are licensed products or products which are supported products. But if you
Correct.
look at downloads of things like Apache or vTiger or Zimbra, they are in millions, and there's a lot of companies who are using it.
Correct. But probably, so we see this trend, that when a bigger brand talks about something, that becomes a market, that becomes a topic of the market. People will start talking about it. So is there a lag behind it? Because people somehow the biggies of the IT industry, whom everyone looks up to, they are not probably very open about. I mean, Red Hat created its own niche. We understand that, but again, Red
So
Hat again, the other biggies that who should talk about
so
open source.
people want to use open source but not talk about it. Like Red Hat, has been bought by IBM. So anyway,
Correct,
if there is no value proposition in open source, and it has been bought at a very high value, IBM has
correct,
bought Red Hat at $20 billion. So
correct.
obviously there is a big market which IBM feels they will
Hmm.
get from purchase of Red Hat. But then when it comes to branding, they would like to brand their own solution. Nobody would like to brand open source per se, but everybody is using Apache. If you look at
Correct,
Apache, Apache is pure open source. Almost
correct.
all the products are using Apache, but they will not openly say that we are using a pure open source product. It is more of a commercial thing. Nobody
Hmm.
wants to talk about it, but almost everybody is using it. And now, if you look at market going forward, in cloud, that even that division is very much blurred. Even now people are looking at on a pay per use model or a subscription model. There it is
Correct.
only the brand which is at the top, the brand which you see at the top. Most of the brands which are on cloud would be using open source at the back, whether it is
Correct.
Apache, whether it is MySQL, whether it is something. So everybody is using it, but when they are selling to the market, they would like to project their own brand only.
But what about the business side of it? This is more from the technology side of we are talking about, right? So what about the businesses? Why a business guy? I mean, today, if you talk about a CIO, he is no more a technology guy. He talks about business. There is a very, it is actually converged. The technology guy also needs to address business challenges today. So whenever somebody talks about adopting a technology, it's not about just the technology that gets adopted, but they also talk about the future business impacts that's going to happen in the technology. Is somehow open source, not being able to penetrate that thought about, thought
if you
for
if
the
you if you
CIOs?
look at yes, if you look at business side of it, any large company has today so many compliance issues. They cannot take free and open source because of compliance issues. I have gone to so many companies where they say that if they take free and open source, there is a auditor who will say that who is the company, who is the OEM which is supporting it. So
Hmm.
any large corporate will always use a supported open source. If you look at
Supported
any
open
large
source.
corporate, there is a very, very large adoption in government also, in defense
Hmm.
also, in telecoms. In India, most of the telecoms are using Red Hat because they
Correct.
require some OEM to back them, because the things are so much integrated that if you have to have patches, if you need updates, you need a company at the back. But if
Hmm.
you look at small organizations, small industry, there are many industries which are using free and open source if they get some good company at the back end which can support those open source technologies. So my feeling is that going forward, any internal data center, large companies will use supporting open source. Small organizations will keep on using free open source as long as they get a good support organization at the back to support them.
But are these open source technologies going to stay in the market? Because we have seen there were a few companies, if you remember. I mean, if I talk about 10 years back, so there was a company called SUSE. Then there was Novel acquired SUSE, and then I don't know. Suddenly, everything started getting disappear. I mean, they started disappearing somewhere. They got merged, they got acquired, and the brands were killed. There were so many versions of open source OS. I'm talking about softwares. I understand about it, but how do you look at the future? I mean, how exactly is there an upward climbing of this trend with supported open source coming up? How about the application side of the business? Like you spoke about vTiger, you spoke about probably Zinga, which is again an open source mail server. So how do you see the trend going up in the future?
If you look at the trend, it's a consolidation phase. Even if you look at commercial things like Windows, how many operating systems are there in the market today? There's only one
Very
operating
few.
system in the market.
Correct.
If you look at databases, how many databases are there in the market? We have Oracle, who has maximum market, and then there are few databases who will have minor market. It is
Correct.
similarly in open source. Now it is a business thing. If you look at operating system, you have Red Hat, then you have Ubuntu, then you have SUSE, which is there in certain markets with alliance with somebody. Similarly, in applications, like I'm saying again, most of the applications will be using open source at the back,
Hmm.
and they will have some supported version at the top. Like vTiger also has come out with a cloud version, but
Correct.
the base is vTiger open source. Nagios has a commercial version, but Nagios core is there as the base. The open source is more about collaboration. Why
Correct.
every company is using open source at the back? Because the kind of collaboration they have with the community, the kind of development they can get, the kind of feedback they can get, the speed with which they can do updates, that is still there and that is growing every day. But
Hmm.
at the front, you will keep on having more and more supported open source, and you will have cloud versions of all the open source packages which will be there. And finally, if you look at cloud, it is more of a price versus uh, feature which will come out.
Absolutely. So
So
there is
my
one
feeling is
again.
that over a period of time, it will get blurred. Yes.
Correct. And actually, rightly said. But there is one more thing that probably the last input that probably I would like to have from you. Security. So a lot of people have this concern that it is open source. My source code is available for either it's an application or an OS or whatever. Even if it is supported version, people talk about getting the community to work on a particular technology. But end of the day, somebody knows the source code of my application. Somebody knows where exactly my vulnerabilities are. Where is the safety thing taken care of? So
So
how
it
would you
is the
like to
other way.
clean this air? Yeah.
Yes, it is the other way. In open source, since the vulnerabilities are out there in the open, there is somebody who is there to take care of the vulnerability very fast.
All right.
While in closed source, vulnerability is there only with the vendor, and sometimes the time they take to take care of the vulnerability is much more. If you look at the statistics,
Hmm.
most of the security solutions are using open source at the back, and most of the vulnerabilities are happening more in closed source solution than in open source, and time for those vulnerabilities to be taken out is much faster in open source solutions. Now see, it is not about pure open source, it is about supported open source. And in supported open source, there are organizations at the back who are working on that, and then there is a whole lot of community which is there to work on those solutions much faster.
Okay.
But one thing I would like to say is that at the desktop level, open source has not been able to make much impact, primarily
Hmm.
because desktop requires so much integration with OEMs. Like if I have a desktop, I need drivers for almost all the devices. That
Correct.
open source, there is nobody who has been able to do it. So I don't see much of a future for open source in desktop, other than for few areas where there is a replication of work. Like if you see call centers,
Hmm.
suppose there is a call center, there are 2,000 employees. They would like to go for open source because if they set up one desktop, they can set up all the desktops by repeating
Correct.
it. But if I look
Correct.
at knowledge worker, where
Hmm.
each user is using his own packages, there I
Hmm.
don't see open source being there in long run.
So basically, end user is not the real market for open source probably. So we are talking about the core side
End
of it.
user, no, home user is not the real market. They are looking at convenience. They are not looking at downloading and doing the R&D themselves, which is required.
Fantastic.
But
I
at
think
that,
you're
but on the cloud level, it is definitely going to be there, and the market is going to increase and every year.
so I think over so many decades, your passion for open source has not stopped at all. I think I see the same energy, I see the same passion that you spoke about open source probably 10, 11 years back when we used to work together.
20 years
But
back.
20 years back. I mean, it's been a long journey, and good. Even we have been talking about few couple of open source areas out here in this market. Yes, it was not the market was not really ready for it. They were not accepting it, but over a period of time, people have started understanding the values, the real values, why they should also have an alternative technology, considered when they have got any requirements. So things are moving, things are changing in this part of the world, and I'm sure it's going to change for good. And definitely, this whole disruption, the whole pandemic, has actually changed the mindset of a lot of people. People have
Yes.
started talking about things which they have never probably considered ever in their life whenever they have thought about any implementation, any technology implementation. So that itself has actually created a lot of market for newer things to be taken to the customers, newer concepts, newer ideas, and broader thoughts probably around technology, and that's creating a lot of traction in the market. So, anyways, I think thank you very much. It was a short, crisp one, but we would like to keep talking with you in future on this,
Yes,
and
definitely.
try to create some pulse, try to create some ripple in the market around this exciting topic of open source, and we'll keep having this kind of conversations in future too. So thank you very
Definitely.
much,
Definitely.
Mukul.
Thanks.
Thank you very much, and we hope to catch up soon again. Thank you, and
Yes,
stay safe.
definitely.
I hope everything is safe out there. All right, thank you.